Get ready to dive into the lives of some seriously strong-willed people from the past. We are talking about individuals who had the world, their families, and sometimes even powerful rulers, telling them they had to get married. For power, for money, for heirs, or just because that is what everyone did. But these 11, they looked at all that pressure, all those expectations, and said a very clear, "No, thank you." Imagine a queen holding onto her crown and her freedom for over 44 years. A genius inventor who believed romance would short-circuit his brain, or a famous writer who accepted a proposal one evening only to take it back the very next morning. These are not just tales of stubbornness. They are stories of conviction, dedication, and sometimes just a deep need for a different kind of life. Let's count them down. Number 11. Greta Garbo, the star who wanted to be alone. Greta Garbo was a name that sparkled in giant letters on movie theater signs during the 1920s and 1930s. Born Greta Lovisa Gustafsson in Stockholm, Sweden, on September 18, 1905, she became one of Hollywood's biggest and most mysterious stars. People were fascinated by her beauty, her talent, and her very, very private life. In an era when movie studios often tried to control every part of a star's image, including their love life, Garbo was different. Pressure for a beautiful, famous actress to marry was huge. Hollywood loved a good romance, on screen and off. A marriage could mean more publicity, more fan interest, and a kind of fairy tale story that sold tickets. Garbo had admirers, plenty of them. One of her most famous relationships was with actor John Gilbert, her co-star in several hit silent films like Flesh and the Devil from 1926. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, and many people hoped it would lead to wedding bells. Story has it that Gilbert proposed multiple times. Some reports even said they were at the altar, or very nearly. And Garbo changed her mind at the last minute. Louis B. Mayer, the powerful head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studio, supposedly wanted them to marry, seeing it as a great publicity move. But Garbo did not walk down the aisle with Gilbert, or anyone else. Why did she say no? Garbo herself famously said, "I want to be let alone." This was not just a line. It seemed to be a deep part of who she was. She valued her independence and her privacy more than the idea of a conventional marriage. In a world that wanted to own a piece of her, staying single was perhaps a way to keep a part of herself truly her own. She was not against love or relationships. She had several significant romantic involvements throughout her life with both men and women, according to biographers. But the formal public commitment of marriage, with all its societal expectations, was something she consistently avoided. Think about the 1930s. For a woman, especially a famous one, not being married was unusual. There were whispers, questions, and constant speculation. Was she too picky? Was she heartbroken? Was she difficult? Or was she just a woman who knew what she wanted? And marriage was not on that list. She retired from films in 1941, at the young age of 36, after her movie Two-Faced Woman was not a success. She never made another film, despite many offers. For the next nearly 50 years, until her death on April 15, 1990, at the age of 84, she lived a quiet life, mostly in New York City. She guarded her privacy fiercely, avoiding photographers and interviews. Her decision to remain unmarried was part of this larger pattern of choosing her own path, away from the spotlight's demands. She had the fame, she had the suitors, she had the pressure, but Greta Garbo chose to define her life on her own terms. And for her, that meant saying no to marriage. Number 10. Emily Dickinson, the poet in white, who chose her own world. Emily Dickinson, born on December 10, 1830, in Amherst, Massachusetts, is one of America's most famous poets. But when she was alive, almost no one knew about her incredible talent. She lived a very quiet, secluded life, especially in her later years. And a big part of that life was her choice not to marry, which was quite a statement for a woman in the 1800s. In 19th century New England, marriage was generally seen as the main goal for a young woman. It meant social standing, financial security, and a defined role in the community. Emily came from a prominent family. Her father, Edward Dickinson, was a lawyer, a politician, and treasurer of Amherst College. Her family was well connected, and there would have been expectations for Emily and her sister Lavinia to marry well. Emily was a lively, intelligent young woman. She had friends. She went to school at Amherst Academy and Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. She was not a recluse from the start. So, what happened? There were men in her life, certainly. Letters show deep and complex friendships with several individuals. There was Benjamin Franklin Newton, a young law student in her father's office, who encouraged her poetry. There was Charles Wadsworth, a married minister from Philadelphia, whom she deeply admired and whose move to San Francisco in 1862 seemed to affect her profoundly. Later in life, there was Judge Otis Phillips, Lord, a widowed family friend, with whom she had a loving correspondence. It is believed that Judge Lord actually proposed marriage to Emily around 1880, when she was nearly 50. Drafts of her letters suggest she seriously considered it, but ultimately she did not accept. Why did she say no? Emily Dickinson's reasons are her own, hidden in her poems and letters, for us to try and understand. Perhaps she valued her creative freedom too much. Marriage in that era often meant a woman's life became dedicated to her husband and children, with little room for intense intellectual or artistic pursuits like hers. Her poetry was her world. It was unconventional, deeply personal, and broke many of the rules of poetry at the time. Maybe she felt that the demands of marriage would silence her unique voice. She wrote nearly 1,800 poems, exploring huge themes like love, death, nature, and immortality, all from her room in Amherst. Her choice to remain single was tied to her choice to withdraw more and more from society. By her 30s, she rarely left her family's homestead. She often dressed in white, adding to her mysterious image. This was not a decision made because she had no options. It was a path she actively chose. Her sister Lavinia, who also never married, protected Emily and her privacy. It was Lavinia who discovered the vast collection of Emily's poems after her death on May 15, 1886, at the age of 55. Without Lavinia, we might never have known the genius who lived so quietly. Emily Dickinson's life shows that sometimes saying no to what society expects is a way of saying yes to something deeply personal and incredibly important, like a lifetime of creating art that would touch the world long after she was gone. Number 9. Jane Austen, the writer who knew all about marriage but chose differently. Jane Austen, born on December 16, 1775, in Steventon, Hampshire, England, gave us some of the most beloved novels in the English language. Think Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma. Her books are filled with heroines navigating the tricky world of love, society, and yes, marriage. Marriage is often the grand prize, the happy ending, so it might seem a little surprising that Jane Austen herself never married. Pressure on women of her class, the gentry, to marry in late 18th and early 19th century England was immense. For women, there were very few ways to support themselves financially. Marriage was not just about love. It was about security, social position, and survival. A single woman without a fortune, an old maid, was often pitied or seen as a burden on her family. Jane was one of 8 children, and her family was not wealthy. Her father was a clergyman. She knew the realities of money and status firsthand. Did Jane have chances to marry? Yes, she did. There were flirtations and attentions from young men. One notable story involves Tom Lefroy, an Irish law student she met when she was 20. Their interactions, full of wit and sparkle, are thought by some to have inspired some of her fictional romances. But he was not wealthy enough, and his family apparently whisked him away. Then there is the most famous incident. In December 1802, when Jane was almost 27, she received a proposal of marriage from Harris Big Wither. He was younger than her by about 5 or 6 years, the heir to a large estate, Manydown Park, in Hampshire. This was, by all practical standards, an excellent match. It would have meant financial security for Jane and her family. She said yes. Then, something happened. The very next morning, Jane changed her mind. She retracted her acceptance. We do not know exactly why. Her letters from this period were mostly destroyed by her sister Cassandra, also a lifelong spinster, perhaps to protect Jane's privacy. But can you imagine the courage it took to accept a proposal that offered everything society said she should want, and then to say no just hours later? It suggests she was not willing to marry for convenience alone. Perhaps she did not love him. Perhaps the thought of that particular life with that particular man felt wrong. Whatever her reasons, it was a bold move. Jane continued to write. Her novels show a keen understanding of the marriage market, its pressures, and its potential joys and sorrows. She did not idealize marriage, but she did seem to believe in marrying for love and respect, not just for money or status. Maybe she never found that perfect combination for herself. She lived with her mother and sister, relying on her brothers for financial support at times, until her writing started to bring in some income. She published 4 novels in her lifetime, and 2 more were published by her brother Henry after her death. She died relatively young, on July 18, 1817, at the age of 41. Jane Austen, who wrote so brilliantly about the journey to the altar, chose not to make that journey herself, leaving behind a legacy not of marriage, but of timeless stories. Number 8. Isaac Newton, the genius whose only true love was discovery. Sir Isaac Newton, born on January 4, 1643, in Woolsthorpe, Lincolnshire, England, was a giant of science. His work changed how we see the universe. Laws of motion, universal gravitation, calculus, these are just some of his mind-blowing contributions. He was a mathematician, a physicist, an astronomer, even an alchemist and theologian. But one thing Newton never was a husband. In the 17th and 18th centuries, it was common for men of Newton's stature, especially those connected to universities like Cambridge where he studied and taught, to marry. Marriage brought stability, a household, and often connections. While celibacy was required for fellows at some colleges for a time, these rules were changing, and many academics did marry, especially later in their careers when they achieved more prominent positions. Newton achieved incredible fame and status in his lifetime. He was president of the Royal Society Warden, and then Master of the Royal Mint, and was knighted by Queen Anne in 1705. He certainly had the means and the social standing to marry if he had wanted to. So why did he remain single his entire life? There is no record of Newton ever having a romantic relationship or expressing interest in one. He was intensely, almost obsessively focused on his work. His studies consumed him. There are stories of him forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep, all because he was lost in thought, grappling with complex scientific or mathematical problems. One famous story, though perhaps exaggerated, tells of him using his sweetheart's finger as a tobacco stopper for his pipe because he was so distracted. The sweetheart even existed, she did not last. It seems that for Newton, intellectual pursuits were far more compelling than human romance. Some historians suggest he might have been asexual or simply had no interest in physical relationships. Others point to his difficult childhood born after his father's death, and his mother remarried and left him with his grandmother for several years as a possible factor in a reserved or detached personality. He was known to be secretive, sometimes quarrelsome with other scientists, and deeply engrossed in his own thoughts. He dedicated vast amounts of time not just to physics and math, but also to alchemy, the ancient practice of trying to turn base metals into gold, and to detailed interpretations of biblical prophecy. These were not pursuits that easily accommodated the demands of family life. He had a close friendship with a Swiss mathematician, Nicolas Fatio de Douillier, in the early 1690s, and the intensity of this relationship has led to some speculation. But it remains just that speculation. What is clear is that Newton's primary passion was the pursuit of knowledge. He once said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." This great ocean of truth was his lifelong companion. He lived to be 84 years old, dying on March 31st, 1727, a celebrated and revered figure, but one who apparently never felt the need for a wife. His legacy was his monumental contribution to science, a marriage of mind and universe. Number 7. Susan B. Anthony, the fighter for rights who said no to distractions. Susan Brownell Anthony, born on February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts, was a towering figure in the fight for women's rights, especially the right to vote. For over 50 years, she traveled, spoke, organized, and campaigned tirelessly. And in a time when most women's lives were defined by marriage and motherhood, Susan B. Anthony chose to remain single, believing it was essential for her life's work. Pressure to marry in mid-19th century America was enormous. A woman's social status, economic security, and even her identity were largely tied to her husband. Unmarried women, or spinsters, were often viewed with pity or suspicion. Susan B. Anthony was not immune to these pressures. She came from a Quaker family that believed in education and equality for women, which gave her a stronger foundation for independence than many women of her time. She worked as a teacher for 15 years, a respectable profession for an unmarried woman. But when she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1851, her life took a new direction. Stanton, who was married and had several children, was a brilliant writer and thinker for the women's rights movement. Anthony, with her organizational skills and freedom from domestic responsibilities, became the public face and the driving force. They formed an incredible partnership. Stanton would often write the speeches, and Anthony would deliver them, traveling across the country, facing hostile crowds and difficult conditions. Why did Anthony choose not to marry? She was clear about it. She saw marriage, as it was structured in her time, as a potential trap for a woman activist. Women in the 1800s had very few legal rights. A married woman's property, her earnings, even her children, often legally belonged to her husband. Anthony believed that to be truly effective in the fight for women's rights, she needed to be independent. She once said, I am a self-supporting woman and I want to be. Marriage, to women as to men, must be a luxury, not a necessity, an incident of life, not all of it. She also famously remarked that she could not consent to be a housekeeper or a doll. She had suitors. There are accounts of men who were interested in her. She chose her cause. She knew that the demands of a husband and family would likely mean giving up her public work, her travels, her constant agitation for change. Her friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton often wrote about the challenges of balancing her activism with her role as a wife and mother, sometimes lamenting that she could not do more. Anthony, by remaining single, had the freedom to dedicate her entire life to the movement. She managed the finances of their organizations, organized conventions, circulated petitions, and faced down politicians. She was not anti-marriage for others, but for herself it was not the path. She fought for married women's property rights, for divorce reform, and for equal guardianship of children, all aimed at making marriage a more equal partnership. Susan B. Anthony died on March 13, 1906, at the age of 86. She did not live to see the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, granting women the right to vote, which was passed in 1920. But her decades of unwavering work, made possible in part by her decision to remain single and fiercely dedicated, were absolutely crucial to that victory. She once said, "Failure is impossible." For her, saying no to marriage was part of saying yes to a future where women had a voice. Number 6. Louisa May Alcott, the author, who found liberty a better companion. Louisa May Alcott, born on November 29, 1832 in Germantown, Pennsylvania, is beloved by millions as the author of Little Women. This classic novel tells the story of the March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, as they grow up, fall in love, and for most of them, marry. The character of Jo March, the independent tomboyish writer, is famously based on Louisa herself. And just like Jo, who initially resisted the idea of marriage, Louisa May Alcott never married in real life. The pressure was certainly there. In 19th century New England, marriage was the expected path for women. Louisa's family, led by her transcendentalist philosopher, Father Bronson Alcott, was often poor. Marriage for Louisa could have meant financial stability, not just for herself, but for her family, whom she deeply loved and supported. Her older sister, Anna, married, and her younger sister, May, also eventually married. Louisa saw the domestic lives of her sisters up close. So why did she choose a different path? Louisa valued her independence and her freedom immensely. She was driven by a need to write and to earn money to support her family, especially her parents and sisters, who often struggled financially. From a young age, she took on various jobs: teacher, seamstress, governess, and even a domestic servant for a brief time. Writing was her true passion and, eventually, her main source of income. She once wrote in her journal, "Liberty is a better husband than love to many of us." This suggests she saw marriage as potentially constraining, something that might interfere with her work and her personal freedom. She was not someone who shunned romance entirely. There are hints of romantic interests in her journals and letters. She had friendships with men like Ralph Waldo Emerson, a close family friend, and Henry David Thoreau, who was one of her early teachers. There was also a young Polish man named Ladislas Laddie Wisniewski, whom she met in Europe, and who some believe was an inspiration for Laurie in Little Women. These connections did not lead to marriage. She seemed wary of losing herself in a relationship. In Little Women, Jo March initially rejects Laurie's proposal, valuing her independence and her writing, though she does eventually marry Professor Bear. Louisa, however, did not write that same ending for herself. Her focus was her work and her family. The success of Little Women, published in 2 volumes in 1868 and 1869, brought her fame and financial security. She was able to provide for her parents, pay off family debts, and support her sister May's artistic studies in Europe. This role as the family provider was one she took very seriously and seemed to derive great satisfaction from. She continued to write prolifically, producing numerous novels, short stories, and articles. She also became involved in social reform movements, particularly abolitionism before the Civil War and women's suffrage later in life. She was the first woman to register to vote in Concord, Massachusetts, in a local school board election. Louisa May Alcott died on March 6, 1888, at the age of 55, just 2 days after her father. She had suffered from chronic health problems for many years, possibly related to mercury poisoning from medicine she took while serving as a nurse during the Civil War. Her life was one of hard work, dedication to her family, and a fierce commitment to her own path. For Louisa, her pen was her partner, and her stories were her children. Saying no to marriage allowed her to say yes to a life of creativity and independence that left a lasting mark on literature. Number 5. Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp, who had a different calling. Florence Nightingale, born on May 12, 1820, in Florence, Italy, hence her name, is celebrated as the founder of modern nursing. Her work during the Crimean War transformed healthcare and saved countless lives. To dedicate herself so completely to her mission, she made a difficult choice. She said no to marriage, despite significant pressure and appealing proposals. Florence came from a wealthy upper-class British family. In Victorian England, a young woman of her social standing was expected to marry well, manage a household, and raise children. That was her prescribed role. Florence was intelligent, attractive, and well-educated. She had suitors. One of the most persistent and suitable was Richard Monckton Milnes, a politician and poet who courted her for several years. He was a good match in terms of intellect and social position. Her family, particularly her mother and older sister Parthenope, strongly wished for her to accept him. They saw it as the natural and desirable course for her life. But Florence felt a different pull. From a young age, she believed she had a calling from God. On February 7, 1837, when she was just 16, she wrote in her diary, "God spoke to me and called me to his service." Initially, she was not sure what this service would be. Over time, it became clear to her that her mission was in nursing, in caring for the sick and reforming hospital conditions. This was a shocking idea for her family. Nursing in the mid-19th century was not a respected profession. Hospitals were often dirty and dangerous places, and nurses were typically uneducated and sometimes considered disreputable. For a lady of Florence's class to want to become a nurse was almost scandalous. Pressure to marry Richard Monckton Milnes was intense. He proposed to her in 1849. She struggled with the decision for a long time. She was fond of him, and she acknowledged the appeal of a life of companionship and domestic happiness. But ultimately, she refused him. Why? She explained in her writings that she believed marriage would absorb her time and energy, preventing her from pursuing her true calling. She wrote that if she married him, she would be satisfied with the ordinary objects of life and would not be able to dedicate herself to the work God intended for her. She felt that her spirit would not be satisfied with a conventional married life. She once wrote, "I have an intellectual nature which requires satisfaction, and that would find it in him. I have a passional nature which requires satisfaction, and that would find it in him. I have a moral and active nature. Her decision caused a deep rift with her family, especially her mother and sister, who could not understand her choice. Florence was determined. She pursued nursing training in Germany. Then came the Crimean War in 1854. Reports of horrific conditions for wounded British soldiers reached England. Florence, with a team of 38 nurses she had recruited and trained, went to the military hospital in Scutari, Turkey. What she found was appalling: filth, infection, lack of supplies, and dying men. She and her nurses cleaned the hospital, organized care, and dramatically reduced the death rate. She became known as the Lady with the Lamp for her nightly rounds tending to patients. After the war, she returned to England as a national hero. She used her fame and influence to push for widespread reforms in military and civilian healthcare. She was a brilliant statistician, using data to prove the need for sanitary improvements. She founded the Nightingale Training School for Nurses at St. Thomas's Hospital in London in 1860. Though she suffered from chronic illness for much of her later life, often bedridden, she continued her work tirelessly, writing thousands of letters and reports. Florence Nightingale lived to be 90 years old, dying on August 13, 1910. She never married. Her no to a conventional life allowed her to say a powerful yes to a mission that changed the world and saved millions of lives. Number 4. Leonardo da Vinci. The Renaissance man too busy unlocking the universe to marry. Leonardo da Vinci, born on April 15, 1452 in Vinci, Italy, was the ultimate Renaissance man. Painter, sculptor, architect, musician, scientist, inventor, anatomist, geologist, cartographer, botanist, and writer. His genius seemed to know no bounds. He painted the Mona Lisa and The Last Supper, two of the most famous paintings in the world. He designed flying machines and studied human anatomy in incredible detail. But one thing this incredibly versatile man never did was marry or have a family in the traditional sense. In Renaissance Italy, marriage was important for social standing, for continuing a family line, and for forming alliances. For an artist like Leonardo, who worked for powerful patrons like Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, and later King Francis I of France, marriage could have been a way to solidify his position or gain further connections. Many artists of his time did marry and have families. So, why did Leonardo remain a lifelong bachelor? The most straightforward answer seems to be his all-consuming dedication to his work and his relentless curiosity. His notebooks, filled with thousands of pages of drawings and writings, show a mind constantly observing, questioning, and exploring. He was driven by an insatiable desire to understand the world around him, from the flight of birds to the flow of water to the workings of the human body. He once wrote, "The painter should be solitary and consider what he sees, discussing it with himself." This suggests he valued solitude for his creative and intellectual processes. A wife and family might have been seen as distractions from this intense focus. There has also been much speculation about Leonardo's personal life and sexuality. In 1476, when he was 24 and working in Florence in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, he was one of several young men accused of sodomy, which was illegal at the time. The charges were eventually dismissed for lack of evidence. This incident, along with the fact that he surrounded himself with handsome young male apprentices and companions throughout his life, like Salai and Francesco Melzi, has led many historians to believe he might have been homosexual. If so, in an era when homosexual acts were condemned, marriage to a woman would have been a very difficult and perhaps dishonest path for him. However, Leonardo himself was very private about his personal feelings. He left no diaries detailing his romantic life. His writings focus on his observations of the natural world, his artistic theories, and his inventions. He seemed to view passion as something to be studied, rather than perhaps something to be personally indulged in a way that led to marriage. He was known for his handsome appearance, his charm, and his refined manners. He was not a recluse. He moved in high social circles, but his primary relationships seemed to be with his patrons, his students, and his intellectual pursuits. He lived with his pupils Salai and Melzi, and Melzi became his principal heir, inheriting Leonardo's notebooks, drawings, and paintings. This suggests deep bonds of affection and trust, a chosen family rather than a conventional one. Leonardo lived a long and incredibly productive life, dying on May 2nd, 1519, in France, at the age of 67. His decision not to marry allowed him the freedom to dedicate every ounce of his extraordinary energy to unlocking the secrets of art and science. His legacy is not in descendants, but in the vast body of work that continues to inspire awe and wonder. Number 3. Nikola Tesla, the electric wizard, who thought love would dull his spark. Nikola Tesla, born on July 10, 1856, in Smiljan, Austrian Empire, now Croatia, was a brilliant and eccentric inventor, electrical engineer, and futurist. He is best known for his contributions to the design of the modern alternating current, AC, electrical system. He envisioned a world powered by wireless energy, and his mind crackled with incredible ideas. But when it came to romance and marriage, Tesla had a very different kind of energy. He stayed far away. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a successful man like Tesla would typically have been expected to marry and start a family. He was tall, handsome, and well-dressed, and he moved in sophisticated circles in New York City. He certainly had admirers. However, Tesla chose a life of celibacy and solitude, believing it was essential for his scientific work. Why did he make this choice? Tesla was utterly devoted to science. He felt that romantic relationships and family life would be a distraction from his research and inventions. He had a very specific and perhaps unusual view on how his energy, mental and physical, should be used. He believed that sexual energy could be transmuted into creative and intellectual power. He once stated, "I do not think you can name many great inventions that have been made by married men." While that statement is debatable, it clearly shows his own conviction. He felt that as an inventor, he had a special mission, and that dedication required all of his focus. He also expressed a kind of idealized, almost reverent view of women, perhaps placing them on a pedestal that made ordinary relationships difficult. He felt women were superior in many ways, but he also seemed to believe that their energies and his own were best kept separate for the sake of his work. He famously said he had made a sacrifice by not marrying, but that it was a sacrifice for his science. He told a reporter once that an inventor has so intense a nature, with so much of it wild, passionate quality, that in giving himself to a woman he might love, he would give everything, and so take everything from his chosen field. He seemed to believe he could not serve two masters, science and a wife. Tesla lived a life of intense work, often in his laboratory, sometimes pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion. He had periods of great success and fame, and also periods of financial struggle and obscurity. He was known for his eccentric habits, such as his obsession with the number 3, his meticulous hygiene, and his love for pigeons, particularly one white pigeon he claimed to love almost as a human being. These quirks, combined with his solitary lifestyle, added to his image as a mysterious genius. He never married and, as far as is known, never had any significant romantic relationships. He lived in hotels for much of his adult life in New York City. He poured all his passion into his inventions: the Tesla coil, alternating current, machinery, experiments with wireless lighting and wireless communication, and visions of global power transmission. He died alone in his hotel room on January 7th, 1943, at the age of 86. Nikola Tesla's decision to remain single was a conscious choice deeply intertwined with his identity as an inventor. He believed that by saying no to marriage, he was saying yes to unlocking the secrets of electricity and a future powered by his extraordinary visions. Number 2. Joan of Arc, the maid, who followed voices, not suitors. Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc, born around 1412 in Domremy, France, is one of history's most astonishing figures. A teenage peasant girl who claimed to hear divine voices, she led the French army to crucial victories during the 100 Years' War, paving the way for Charles V to be crowned King of France. In a world where women, especially young peasant women, had very little power or agency, Joan's story is remarkable. And part of that story is her steadfast refusal of marriage, tied to her sacred mission. For a village girl in 15th century France, marriage was the almost inevitable path. It was arranged by families, often for practical reasons, like combining land or resources. Joan's father, Jacques d'Arc, was a farmer and a village official. It is recorded that he tried to arrange a marriage for Joan. There was even a lawsuit. A young man claimed Joan had promised to marry him, but she denied it in court, stating she had made no such promise. She won the case. This shows that even before her public mission began, Joan was asserting her independence in this area. Why did she say no? Joan's primary reason was her divine calling. From the age of 13, she said she heard the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. These voices, she claimed, told her she had a mission from God to drive the English out of France and to see the Dauphin Charles crowned king. As part of this divine mission, she took a vow of virginity. This vow was not just a personal choice. It was a symbol of her purity and her complete dedication to God's will. In that era, a maid or virgin was often seen as having a special spiritual power or purity. Her virginity was even examined by theologians and noblewomen to verify her claims and character before Charles would trust her with an army. So, when her father tried to marry her off, or when that young man claimed a promise, Joan resisted because it conflicted with what she believed God was asking of her. Marriage would have tied her to a domestic life, to a husband, and to the expectations of a wife and mother. It would have made her mission to lead armies and counsel a king impossible. Her focus was singular: to obey her voices and save France. Her brief, meteoric career lasted only about 2 years. In 1429, at the age of roughly 17, she convinced Charles to give her a chance. She dressed in men's armor, carried a banner, and inspired the demoralized French troops. Her most famous victory was lifting the siege of Orleans. After several more successes, Charles VI was crowned king in Reims Cathedral with Joan at his side. But her fortunes soon changed. She was captured by Burgundian soldiers allied with the English in May 1430. They sold her to the English. She was put on trial for heresy and witchcraft by a pro-English church court. Her male clothing, her claims of divine voices, and her defiance of church authorities were all used against her. Her virginity and her refusal to submit to the traditional female role, including marriage, were undoubtedly part of what made her seem so dangerous and unnatural to her accusers. Despite a long and grueling trial, she mostly defended herself with courage and cleverness. But she was ultimately condemned and burned at the stake in Rouen on May 30th, 1431. She was only about 19 years old. Joan of Arc's no to marriage was a no to a life that would have prevented her from answering what she believed was a higher calling. It was a choice that allowed her to step onto the stage of history in a way no other woman of her time and place did. Decades later, she was retried, and her conviction was overturned. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, she was canonized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. Her story is a powerful testament to faith, courage, and an unwavering commitment to a path even when it meant defying all conventions, including the expectation of marriage. Number 1. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, who married her kingdom. Queen Elizabeth I of England, born on September 7, 1533 in Greenwich, London, reigned for an astonishing 44 years, from 1558 until her death in 1603. Her era, the Elizabethan Age, was a golden age for England, a time of exploration, cultural flourishing with figures like Shakespeare, and growing national power. And throughout her long reign, Elizabeth faced relentless, overwhelming pressure to marry. Yet, she never did. She became known as the Virgin Queen, a title she cultivated. Pressure came from all sides. Her Privy Council, her Parliament, foreign rulers, and even her people, everyone seemed to believe it was essential for the Queen to marry. Why? Firstly, succession. Elizabeth had no. If she died without an heir of her body, there could be a succession crisis, potentially plunging England into civil war or foreign domination. This was a very real fear. Her own father, Henry VI, had gone to extreme lengths, breaking with the Roman Catholic Church to secure a male heir. Secondly, alliances. Marriage to a foreign prince could forge a powerful political or military alliance. Thirdly, the belief that a woman could not rule effectively alone. In the 16th century, it was widely assumed that a queen needed a king beside her to provide strength, guidance, and authority. And the suitors were plentiful. There was Philip II of Spain, her former brother-in-law, a powerful Catholic monarch. There was Eric Ziv of Sweden. There were Archdukes Charles and Ferdinand of Austria from the Holy Roman Empire. There was the Duke of Anjou and Alençon from France, a serious contender later in her reign. And there were English noblemen too, most famously Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, her childhood friend and, many believed, the love of her life. The speculation about whether she would marry Dudley was intense for years. So, with all this pressure and all these options, why did Elizabeth say no time and time again? Her reasons were complex and likely evolved over her reign. One key reason was her desire for independence and control. Marrying a foreign prince might mean subordinating English interests to those of another country, or bringing a foreign influence that her people might resent. Marrying an English nobleman might create jealousy and factionalism among the other nobles. Any husband would likely expect to share power, to be king in practice, if not in name. Elizabeth was a very shrewd and determined ruler. She was not inclined to share her authority. Her experiences as a young woman, including being imprisoned in the Tower of London by her half-sister Queen Mary I, had taught her the importance of self-reliance and caution. Her personal feelings also played a role. Tragic fates of her mother, Anne Boleyn, executed by Henry VI, and her stepmother, Catherine Howard, also executed, might have given her a grim view of marriage, especially for a queen. With Robert Dudley, while there may have been deep affection, marrying him was politically risky, especially after the suspicious death of his wife, Amy Robsart. Elizabeth was a master of using her unmarried status as a diplomatic tool. She kept potential suitors dangling for years, using the prospect of her hand in marriage to negotiate alliances or to keep foreign powers off balance. It was a long, intricate game of political chess. As she grew older, and the likelihood of her having children diminished, she began to cultivate the image of the Virgin Queen, married to her kingdom and her people. She told Parliament in 1559, "And in the end this shall be for me sufficient, that a marble stone shall declare that a queen, having reigned such a time, lived and died a virgin." And later, "I have already joined myself in marriage to a husband, namely the Kingdom of England." Her decision was not without its anxieties. The succession question remained a worry throughout her reign. But she navigated these challenges with extraordinary skill. She survived plots and threats, defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588, and left England stronger and more confident than she found it. When she died on March 24, 1603, at the age of 69, she had successfully ruled alone, a woman in a man's world defying all expectations. Her no to marriage was a resounding yes to her own sovereignty and to her vision for England, making her one of history's most iconic and powerful rulers.